The Fenelon Place Elevator has been described as the world's steepest, shortest scenic railway. Running 296 feet in length and elevating passengers 189 feet, it gives beautiful views of downtown Dubuque, the Mississippi River, and 3 states. But our story starts at the bottom. In Dubuque, Iowa, in 1882, everything shut down for an hour and a half at noon so everyone can go home for lunch. Mr. J.K. Graves, a former mayor, state senator, and banker, lived at the top of the bluffs and worked at the bottom. Unfortunately, he had to spend half an hour driving his horse and buggy round the bluff to get to the top, and another half hour to return downtown, even though his bank was only 2.5 blocks away. Mr. Graves liked to take a half hour for his lunch and then a half-hour nap, but that was impossible because of the long buggy ride. He had seen inclined railways in Europe and decided that a cable car would solve his problem. He petitioned the city for the right to build, and the franchise was granted to him on June 5th, 1882. He hired John Bell, a local engineer, to design and build a single cable car modeled after those used in the Alps. The original cable car, which was built for Mr. Graves' private use, had a plain wooden building that housed a coal-fired steam boiler and a winch. A wooden Swiss-style car was hauled up and down on the 2 rails by a hemp rope. Mr. Graves' cable car operated for the first time on July 25th, 1882. After that, he had his gardener let him down in the morning, bring him up at noon, down after lunch, and up again at the end of the workday. And it wasn't long before his neighbors began meeting him at the elevator and asking for rides. Two years later, the elevator burned down. Fire from the boiler caught the wooden structure. When he rebuilt the elevator, he decided to open it up to the public and charged 5 cents a ride. In 1893, the elevator burned again. Because of the recession, Mr. Graves could not afford to rebuild the cable car. The neighbors, who had come to depend on the elevator to get them to work, the church, the school, and the market, banded together and formed the Fenelon Place Elevator Company. Mr. Graves gave them the franchise for the right-of-way for the track. Traveling to the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago, Illinois, the group brought back a streetcar motor, turnstile, and steel cables for the cars. They had remembered that each time the elevator burned down, the fire also burned through the hemp rope and sent the cable car crashing down the hill, destroying the little house at the bottom. They also installed 3 rails with a 4th bypass in the middle to allow for the operation of 2 counterbalanced cars. By 1912, C.B. Trenwin, who had built a house next door, became the sole stockholder. Mr. Trenwin added garages to the north and south side of the operator's house in 1916. He also added a second-floor apartment which the neighborhood men could use for a meeting room and where they could smoke and play cards without any interference with their wives. In 1962, there was another fire. This time it was an electrical fire between the ceiling of the operator's room and the apartment upstairs. This brought the realization that the price had to go up, and they raised it to 10 cents. In 1977, the cable cars were completely rebuilt, and after 84 years, the original gear drive was replaced by a modern geared box with a DC motor. Driving through Dubuque, Iowa, you may notice a large square tower. The shot tower is one of the last remaining in the United States. The tower was built in 1856 by George W. Rogers and Company to provide lead shot for the military, standing 120.5 feet above the current ground level. 7 stories are of galena dolomite, and the uppermost 3 stories are built of soft red brick. There is strong evidence that some of the originally exposed column base is now buried, as is an estimated 15 to 20 feet of stone foundation. The invention of shot towers enabled economical production of many nearly perfect lead spheres of just the right size to fit into muskets. To make the shot, molten lead was poured through a grate at the top of the tower. The droplets fell from that grate and were relatively uniform in size, as the fall provided enough time for the liquid metal droplet to form into a sphere before landing in the water below. The tower could produce between 6 and 8 tons of shot daily, but it rarely operated at full capacity, and in 1881 a framed glass observatory was added to the top of the shot tower to convert it into a fire watchtower for Standard Lumber Company. The tower was abandoned after a series of fires in 1911 destroyed the local lumber industry and damaged the tower's wooden interior. Those fires were determined to be arson, but no arrests were ever made. The tower then stood roofless until 1960, when a concrete cap with a hatchway was added to the tower, and replacement brick was used to reconstruct the lost upper portion of the top floor.